George, a brilliant and hard-working young businessman, built his company from the ground up with nothing but determination and sleepless nights. Focused only on success, he shut out love and friendship, letting pride guide his steps. But one fateful mistake, slapping a stranger in anger, turned his world upside down when that same woman, Bella, emerged as the powerful CEO holding the keys to his future. What began as shame and rivalry soon transformed into forgiveness, growth, and an unexpected love story. This is a tale of ambition, pride, betrayal, second chances, and the discovery that true success means nothing without love. Sit back, relax, and find out what happened in this wonderful story. George was a man who carried himself with quiet confidence. Tall, broad-shouldered, and undeniably handsome, he had the kind of presence that could silence a noisy room without him uttering a word. Yet, what made him remarkable was not his looks but his sharp, calculating mind. From the time he was a boy, numbers and strategies fascinated him more than games or idle chatter. While others dreamed of becoming celebrities or athletes, George dreamed of building empires. In the university, George was nothing short of exceptional. While his peers spent late nights partying, he spent his nights poring over books, working on business models, and researching successful entrepreneurs. His diligence paid off when he graduated at the top of his class in business administration. His professors spoke highly of him, calling him a rare mind and a future giant in the business world. George wore those praises like invisible armor, driving him further into his mission to conquer the world of business. Upon graduation, while many of his classmates ran after white-collar jobs, George took a different path. With a small loan from a distant relative and savings from odd jobs, he started a modest marketing firm. The beginning was rough. Days when his office had only a table, one chair, and a borrowed laptop. But George never complained. He believed in sweat, in persistence, and in planting seeds that one day would grow into a forest. Within a few years, his tiny firm had blossomed. Clients trusted him because he was sharp, disciplined, and had a gift for seeing what others could not. Still, George's hunger remained. He wanted more than the small contracts he had been securing. He longed for bigger deals, major partnerships that would place his firm on the map. He wrote proposal after proposal, sending them to firms that barely acknowledged him. Rejection letters became part of his daily routine, each one stinging like a bee but never stopping his march forward. Then, one evening, as he sat staring at yet another rejection email, his phone buzzed. It was a notification from his company email. George's heart skipped when he opened it. The message was brief but life-changing. "Congratulations. Your company has been shortlisted for an interview regarding a major contract with one of the biggest firms in the country. Kindly report to our headquarters next week for an official interview." George froze, his heart pounding. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for. His sleepless nights, his endless sacrifices, his tears that nobody saw, they were finally paying off. He leaned back in his chair and let out a laugh, the kind of laugh that carried relief, disbelief, and joy all at once. For the first time in years, George allowed himself to dream bigger. He saw his future unfolding before him: wealth, influence, respect. This contract could change his life forever. He didn't know it yet, but it was also the beginning of the greatest test of his life. The morning of the interview arrived like no other. George woke before dawn, his heart beating faster than usual. He stood by the mirror, carefully adjusting his tie. His reflection stared back at him. A young man who had fought tooth and nail to reach this moment. His crisp black suit fit perfectly, his shoes shone like glass, and his documents were neatly arranged in a slim black folder. Everything about him screamed determination. For once, George allowed himself to smile. "Today is the day," he whispered, his eyes glittering with ambition. He knew this interview wasn't just another chance, it was the door to the future he had dreamed of. He grabbed his car keys, tucked the folder under his arm, and hurried out. The early morning sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky with strokes of gold. George drove with excitement bubbling in his chest, already imagining himself shaking hands with board members, already picturing his company's name plastered on the walls of a multi-million-dollar contract. Halfway through the journey, a sudden thought struck him like a sharp blow. His eyes widened in horror. "The document," he muttered, pressing the brakes. The most important file, the original copy of a financial statement, was still lying on his desk at home. Panic gripped him. Going back home would mean arriving late, and lateness could destroy his chance before it even began. George pulled over, his mind racing. Then, he remembered, the backup copy saved on his phone. A cyber cafe could solve the problem. Without hesitation, he turned the steering wheel and headed for the nearest cafe. Time was against him, but George refused to panic. He believed his resourcefulness would save him. At the cyber cafe, he rushed inside, his voice urgent. "Please, can you help me print this copy? I'm late for a very important appointment." His tone was desperate yet commanding. The attendant, seeing the fire in George's eyes, quickly complied. In minutes, the documents were ready. George grabbed them, muttering a quick, "Thank you," and turned to leave. But just as he stepped outside, fate staged a collision. A woman, elegant and stunning in her appearance, entered the cafe at the exact same time. She wore a classy outfit that screamed wealth and sophistication. Her perfume lingered in the air as she accidentally collided with George. The folder slipped from his hand, and the papers scattered across the ground. George's temper flared instantly. "Are you blind?" he snapped, glaring at her. The woman bent quickly to gather the papers. "I'm so sorry, sir," she said softly, her voice refined. She lifted her eyes, and for the briefest second, George saw beauty that could silence storms. But his anger drowned out everything else. "You must be very stupid," George barked, snatching the documents from her hand. Without thinking, he raised his palm and struck her across the face. The sound of the slap echoed sharply. The woman froze, shocked, her hand instinctively moving to her cheek. "Next time, look where you're going," George spat, his voice dripping with fury. Without another glance, he stormed to his car and drove away. Behind him, the woman stood rooted to the spot. Her name was Bella, and though George did not know it yet, she held the power to determine the course of his destiny. George drove like a man on a mission, his jaw tight and his hands gripping the steering wheel. The encounter at the cyber cafe replayed in his mind, but he pushed it aside. To him, the woman was nothing more than a distraction, an obstacle that had crossed his path at the wrong moment. All that mattered now was the interview. When he arrived at the company headquarters, the sight of the tall glass building filled him with both awe and determination. This was the arena where giants made decisions, where contracts worth millions were signed. George parked his car, straightened his suit, and marched inside with the confidence of a man who believed destiny was on his side. The waiting area buzzed with activity. Men and women in suits sat nervously with their documents, while George sat quietly, his mind rehearsing the answers he had prepared. Every second felt like an eternity. At last, a receptionist called his name. "Mr. George, you may go in now." George rose, adjusted his tie once more, and walked into the boardroom with hope pounding in his chest. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. But the moment his eyes lifted to see the panel seated before him, his heart stopped. Sitting at the center of the table, her face calm yet commanding, was the woman from the cyber cafe. Bella. Time seemed to freeze. George's body went rigid, his mind screaming in disbelief. The same woman he had insulted, the same woman he had slapped, was here, sitting as one of the key executives of the company offering the contract. Bella's eyes met his. Recognition flashed instantly, and her calm expression hardened into steel. "You?" she said, her voice sharp, carrying both anger and authority. George's lips trembled. I can explain," he stammered, his confidence crumbling. "Explain what?" Bella cut in, her voice cold as ice. The other board members looked between them, confused by the tension. Bella did not wait for clarification. She leaned back in her chair and said firmly, "Keep your explanations to yourself. Get out of my office." George's world collapsed in that moment. His throat went dry, but desperation forced words out of his mouth. "Please, Ma, I really need this contract. This is everything I've worked for." Bella's voice rose, her tone sharp as a blade. "I said get out, or I will call security." Shame washed over George like a storm. His shoulders sagged, his eyes dropped to the floor, and with trembling steps, he turned around. The same hands that once held hope now clutched failure. He walked out of the office without a glance back, his dreams shattering into pieces. Outside the building, George's chest tightened. He leaned against his car, the weight of humiliation pressing down on him. For years, he had fought, sacrificed, and endured, only for his temper to destroy it all in a single moment. He wept, not just for the lost contract, but for the man he had allowed himself to become. But fate was not done with George yet. George sat behind the wheel of his car, his hands trembling. His vision blurred with tears as he struggled to breathe. The humiliation of the interview replayed over and over in his mind like a cruel movie. He had dreamt of that moment for years, and now, because of his anger and careless tongue, everything was gone. He struck the steering wheel with his fists. "Why did I do that?" he shouted to himself, his voice breaking. His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, his heart pounding against his ribs. He remembered Bella's face, her shock, her anger, her command for him to leave. Shame pierced him deeper than any rejection letter ever had. The sky began to darken with clouds as he started the engine. He drove aimlessly, his thoughts too loud, his spirit too broken. His eyes, red and swollen from crying, barely focused on the road ahead. Each turn of the wheel felt heavy, each kilometer stretched like an endless punishment. "Everything I've worked for, gone," he whispered, his voice hollow. "What will become of me now?" As the rain began to fall, George's grip on the wheel tightened. He pressed the accelerator harder, his frustration translating into speed. The road grew slippery, but George barely noticed. His mind was drowning in regret. He thought of the nights he stayed awake working, of the friends he had pushed away, of the women he had driven off with his sharp temper. For what? To end up in shame? Suddenly, a truck ahead swerved slightly, its tires screeching against the wet asphalt. George panicked, jerking the wheel too hard. His car skidded, spinning out of control. The world around him blurred, lights, rain, and noise crashing together. His heart leapt into his throat as the car slammed into the roadside barrier with a deafening crash. Silence followed, then pain, sharp, searing pain. George's body went limp against the seat, his consciousness slipping away. The last thing he heard was the distant sound of voices shouting, footsteps running toward him, and the faint wail of a siren. When he opened his eyes, everything was white, the walls, the sheets, the lights above him. His body felt heavy, his head bandaged, his limbs weak. Then he realized he was in a hospital bed. But before he could even gather his thoughts, darkness pulled him back under, dragging him into a coma that would last for days. While George lay unconscious, another battle was beginning in someone else's heart. In her mansion that night, Bella paced restlessly. Her chest was tight, her mind refusing to rest. She replayed the slap, the anger, and the look on George's face when she sent him out. Something deep within her whispered that she had gone too far. But pride fought back, reminding her of the humiliation she had endured at his hands. Still, she could not sleep. Bella had wealth, beauty, and power, yet her spirit felt uneasy. She did not know why, but George's face haunted her in the silence of the night. Bella sat by the large window of her mansion, staring out into the darkness. The city lights sparkled in the distance, but her heart carried no peace. She had everything most women desired: wealth, power, beauty, and influence. Yet that night, none of it brought her comfort. She replayed the day's events in her mind. The collision at the cafe, the sting of the slap, George's furious words, and finally, her own voice, cold and sharp, throwing him out of the office. At first, she had felt justified. After all, who would tolerate such disrespect? But as the hours passed, something inside her kept whispering that she had gone too far. She rose from her chair and began pacing the room. "Why am I even thinking about him?" she muttered. But the more she tried to push George from her mind, the stronger the unease grew. She remembered the fire in his eyes when he entered the boardroom, the desperation in his voice when he pleaded, "Please Ma, I really need this contract." Bella sighed deeply. She was known for her decisiveness, for her ability to separate emotions from business. Yet, tonight was different. For the first time in years, her conscience would not let her rest. The next morning, Bella arrived at her office unusually early. Her staff noticed the change in her demeanor, but no one dared to ask. She went straight to the records department and requested George's file. As she flipped through the documents, her eyes softened. His academic achievements were outstanding, his firm had a reputation for hard work, and his growth, though small, was impressive. "This man, he really has potential," she whispered. Regret stabbed at her heart. She remembered the look of defeat on his face when he walked out. The slap may have been unforgivable, but had she destroyed a man's future in a moment of anger? Her decision was made. Bella closed the file, tucked it under her arm, and called her driver. She had seen his residential address on the document, and she wanted to meet him face to face, not as an executive, not as a victim of his temper, but as a woman who wanted to understand. When she arrived at his residence, the gate man looked surprised. "Madam, are you looking for Mr. George?" "Yes," Bella replied firmly. The man's face dropped. "Ah, madam, George is not at home. He was involved in an accident yesterday evening. They rushed him to the hospital. He's been unconscious since then." Bella's heart skipped a beat. The words struck her like lightning. "Accident?" she whispered, her hand clutching her chest. "Yes, madam, a very serious one." Without another word, Bella hurried back to her car, her heart pounding with guilt and fear. Moments later, she was at the hospital, her heels clicking sharply against the floor as she rushed to the reception. "George," she whispered under her breath, her eyes searching desperately. And it was at that very moment, as she pushed open the door to his hospital room, that George stirred. His eyelids fluttered open, the light of life returning after 3 long days of darkness. Bella froze at the doorway. George's eyes met hers, weak but aware, and in that silent exchange, the world shifted. George's eyelids fluttered like the wings of a tired bird. His chest rose and fell weakly, but the beeping of the hospital monitor told the doctors and nurses that life had returned to him. For 3 long days, he had drifted in darkness, trapped between existence and nothingness. Now, as his vision cleared, the white walls of the hospital slowly sharpened into view. And then he saw her. Bella. She stood at the doorway. Her face, usually firm and commanding, was softened by something George couldn't understand. Was it guilt? Concern? Pity? He blinked, unsure if he was dreaming. Why? You? His voice cracked, barely audible. Bella took a cautious step forward, her heels clicking softly against the tiled floor. Her heart raced. She had come prepared to see a man broken by his accident, but she had not expected the weight of his weak eyes looking straight into hers. George, she whispered, her voice unsteady. For a moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the steady beep of the monitor. George turned his face away, tears pricking his eyes. "Why are you here?" he asked, his voice thick with shame. Bella hesitated, then moved closer until she stood by his bedside. She placed the folder she had brought on the table beside him and spoke softly. "Because I couldn't sleep, because I needed to see you, and because..." Her voice faltered, and she swallowed. "I wanted to apologize." George's head turned slowly, his eyes narrowing in confusion. "Apologize? For what? You didn't slap me. You didn't insult me. I did all that to you. And because of me, I lost everything." Bella's gaze fell to the floor. For years she had been a woman of pride, unyielding and untouchable. But standing there, her heart told her that this man deserved her honesty. "I reacted with anger," she admitted. "Yes, you wronged me, but I could have handled it differently. I let my pride speak louder than reason. Sending you away without giving you a chance, it was wrong." George let out a bitter laugh that turned into a cough. "You don't owe me anything. I destroyed myself with my temper. Maybe this accident is punishment for who I've become." His voice cracked, his eyes welling with tears. Bella's hand trembled as she reached for his. She hesitated, then gently placed her palm over his bruised knuckles. "No, George. This isn't punishment. This is a second chance." Her words hung in the air like a lifeline. George stared at her, searching for sarcasm, but found none. Only sincerity. For the first time in years, he felt something stir inside him. A flicker of hope not tied to contracts or money, but to a human connection he had long denied himself. And in that quiet hospital room, something began. Not love, not yet. But a crack in the walls George had built around his heart. Bella inhaled deeply, steadying her thoughts. She reached into her handbag, pulled out a neatly sealed envelope, and placed it gently on his bedside table. "George," she said, her tone serious, "I went through your file again. Your records, your proposals, your company's growth. And I realized something. You deserve that contract." George froze, staring at the envelope as though it were a mirage. His lips trembled. Bella continued, her eyes meeting his. "I will personally endorse you. The board trusts my decisions, and I will make sure they sign this deal with you. Not because of pity, not because of this accident, but because your work speaks for itself. You've earned it." For a moment, George was speechless. His throat tightened, his heart pounding as tears welled in his eyes. After everything I did to you, after how I treated you." His voice broke, shame swallowing his words. Bella shook her head gently. "We've both made mistakes, George. But sometimes life gives us second chances. Take this one. Not just for your company, but for yourself. Prove to me, and to everyone else, that your anger is not stronger than your vision." George pressed his palms to his face, his shoulders shaking as tears slipped through his fingers. For years, he had fought alone, convinced the world owed him nothing. And now, here was the very woman he had wronged, handing him the opportunity of a lifetime. He lowered his hand slowly, his voice trembling but firm. "Bella, I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank me," she replied with a soft but steady gaze. "Just don't waste it." At that moment, the room felt different, lighter, filled with the weight of forgiveness and the birth of something fragile but powerful. George nodded, his heart swelling with gratitude. And though neither of them said it aloud, both knew this contract was no longer just business. It was the beginning of a bond that would grow beyond signatures and profits. A week later, George was discharged from the hospital. Bella personally arranged for his transport and even sent a team from her company to help him settle back at home. That same week, news came through officially. The contract had been signed. George's firm would now partner with one of the biggest companies in the country. It was the breakthrough he had long prayed for. The day he held the signed documents in his hands, George's eyes filled with tears. He stood in his small office, staring at the papers that represented not just opportunity but redemption. His employees cheered, some even crying with joy. They had stood by him during the difficult years, and now, their faith was rewarded. Later that evening, as the office buzzed with celebration, George stepped outside for fresh air. Bella's car pulled up quietly, and she stepped out, elegant as always. "Congratulations," she said with a small smile. George looked at her, his eyes shining with gratitude. "This isn't just my victory. It's ours. Without you, none of this would have been possible." Bella tilted her head, her lips curving into a smile that carried both pride and warmth. "Then make sure you honor it, George. Don't let your temper destroy what your hard work has built." For the first time in a long while, George felt something stir in his heart, something beyond business, beyond ambition. As he looked at Bella under the fading sunset, he realized this partnership was becoming something deeper than a contract. Something personal, something fragile, something real. The weeks following the contract signing were some of the most transformative of George's life. His once struggling firm now buzzed with new energy. Bigger offices were rented, more staff were recruited, and projects began pouring in at a pace he had never imagined. For the first time, George felt like the future he had always dreamed of was finally within reach. But alongside this professional success, something else was growing quietly: his bond with Bella. At first, their meetings were purely business. She often came by to check on the progress of the partnership. Together, they reviewed reports, discussed strategies, and attended high-profile meetings. Yet, with each passing day, their conversations stretched beyond the walls of boardrooms. George found himself laughing with Bella, something he hadn't done in a long while. She shared stories of her childhood, her struggles as a woman trying to be taken seriously in the male-dominated business world, and the sacrifices she had made to reach the top. George listened intently, amazed at her resilience. One evening, after a long presentation at a corporate event, Bella suggested they grab dinner before heading home. They sat at a quiet rooftop restaurant overlooking the city. The twinkling lights below gave the night a soft glow. George, unusually relaxed, leaned back in his chair. "You know, I used to think success was all about how much you could achieve on your own. That if you worked hard enough, you didn't need anyone. But lately," he paused, searching for the right words. "Lately, I realize success feels empty if there's no one to share it with." Bella looked at him, her expression unreadable at first. Then, slowly, she smiled. "That's because success is more than money and contracts. It's about impact, about connection, about who stands with you when things fall apart." Her words lingered in George's heart long after dinner ended. Over the next few weeks, their bond deepened further. Bella became not just his partner in business, but his confidant. When George felt overwhelmed by the demands of expansion, she offered guidance. When self-doubt crept in, she reminded him of his worth. For the first time since his graduation, George wasn't walking the road alone. But deep inside, he also knew something fragile was forming between them. Something that could either grow into love or be crushed under the weight of ambition and pride. As he watched Bella walk out of his office one evening, the realization hit him hard. He wasn't just grateful for her support anymore. He was beginning to fall for her. Months later, George was invited to grand corporate dinner where he was being honored for excellence in business innovation. The grand ballroom glittered with gold chandeliers, the sound of clinking glasses echoing across the hall. Guests in elegant gowns and sharp tuxedos mingled, their conversations filled with admiration for George's remarkable rise in the business world. Tonight was his night, an evening where the city's elite had gathered to honor him with the Business Innovator of the Year award. But as George stood on the stage, his eyes scanned the crowd for only one person. Bella. She sat near the front, radiant in a deep blue gown that shimmered with every movement. Her smile carried pride, warmth, and something deeper, love. George's chest tightened. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was about the woman who had entered his life in the most unexpected way, tested him, broken him, and finally rebuilt him. When the applause died down, George took the microphone. His voice, though steady, carried the weight of his journey. "Years ago," he began, "I thought success was measured by sleepless nights, by the size of your office, or the number of contracts you secured. I shut people out. I turned away anyone who tried to care for me because I believed focus meant isolation. But life had other plans." The audience listened in silence, moved by the honesty in his tone. George's gaze shifted to Bella, and the room seemed to blur until she was the only one he could see. "I once made the biggest mistake of my life, letting pride blind me to kindness. That mistake almost cost me not only a great opportunity, but also the chance to know someone extraordinary. Tonight, I stand here not just as an award winner, but as a man who finally understands that true success is not about wealth or recognition. It's about love, about humility, about the people who stand with you when you fall." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, some dabbing tears from their eyes. George's voice softened, trembling with emotion. "I dedicate this award to Bella, my partner, my confidant, my heart. Without her, I would still be lost in my pride. She is the reason I found my true self." The hall erupted into thunderous applause as George lowered the microphone. But the moment was not complete. With a boldness he had never felt before, he walked down from the stage and toward Bella. The room grew still, anticipation thick in the air. He stopped in front of her, reaching for her hand. "Bella," he said softly, his voice breaking slightly, "you changed my life in ways I can never repay. Not with money, not with success, but with love. Will you walk this journey with me, not just as my business partner, but as the woman I love, for the rest of my days?" Bella's eyes glistened with tears. She stood, her graceful presence commanding the room as much as George's words had. She cupped his face gently, and with a trembling smile, whispered, "Yes, George. 1,000 times yes." The audience erupted into cheers, clapping and whistling, as George pulled her into a warm embrace. It wasn't just a kiss or a public declaration, it was the sealing of two journeys into one destiny. That night, George finally felt whole. The contracts, the awards, the wealth, they were all shadows compared to the light Bella brought into his life. He had chased success with desperation, only to discover that true success was not about conquering the world, but about finding someone to share it with. And as the night drew to a close, with Bella's hand entwined in his, George knew he had finally won. Not just in business, but in love, in life, and in the silent battles of the heart. Pride may open doors, but only humility and love can keep them open. True success is not measured by wealth or power, but by the relationships we nurture along the way. Thank you so much for watching to the end. Guess what? I am cooking something really great that you wouldn't want to miss. So subscribe now and join our family. Give this video a thumbs up and share to your family and friends. See you soon.